welcome everybody to the CCS ISO IEC 15118 360 webinar and Q&A session. We are live here from Aubernay, France, in the Hager Group's headquarters, and we've had quite an interesting and informative day so far, with live testing and good presentations, and we are very excited to include a global audience into this forum as we talk about ISO 15118 and CCS. Oleg?
Good evening, depending where you're dialing from, anywhere from the morning of Pacific time in California to late night in Japan, China. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you're dialing from. You could be in China, you could be in Japan, you could be on the Pacific coast of the United States, or here in Europe. So, welcome. My name is Oleg Logvinov. I work with a company called IoTecha. And our goal is here today to share with you what CCS, Combined Charging System, with ISO IEC really is. Why is it an important conversation? Today, we have more and more electric vehicles entering the market in massive numbers. What we need is a massive charging infrastructure. And when we talk about charging infrastructure, we're talking about charging at home, charging at the office, charging at gas stations. It used to be a gas station, but now becoming a charging station. Charging at destination locations where it's convenient for us while we do grocery shopping to buy some electricity as well as we're buying a carton of milk, as an example. So what we're doing here is basically providing an opportunity for every one of us to get more knowledge and more information about combined charging system. Why do we call it combined? It's very simple. We combine AC and DC charging from single-digit kilowatt all the way to now 450 kilowatt DC. And by the way, the new generation of the standards that is in development for commercial trucks and commercial vehicles is reaching over 2 megawatt of power. And what will be also covered by the same standard when it comes to communication. So when we talk about combined charging system, we define the method of energy transfer. But one of the key components of the charging infrastructure is actually the ability to transfer information between the vehicle and the charger. And that standard is called ISO IEC 15118. I know it's a difficult name, it's not a marketing name, it's a standard name. But it's a part of combined charging system. And one of the key features of the standard is actually to enable seamless and absolutely effortless charging of electric vehicles. You just plug it in and charge. That's why it's called Plug&Charge. So essentially, it's the same experience. You stepped out of the airplane, you power your smartphone, and seconds later, you can make a phone call. It has to be exactly as easy and simple to charge the car. So as we're moving forward in this market, we would like to talk about it. And one of the main reasons we would like to talk about it, because it's not just about how easy it is to charge a car. It's about additional services that we can enable in the same ecosystem. Because remember, in many cases, data, bits and bytes that can be floating between the car and the charger can become more valuable than the electrons that are delivered to the car, which opens up a host of new opportunities, making charging easier, less expensive, and sometimes maybe even profitable for the consumer. Not to mention enabling features that create opportunities for us, as an example, to supply home with electricity when there is a blackout. I know not many of you are experiencing blackouts, but if you live in California, as an example, that could be a part of your daily life. So it becomes very valuable. Many of those things will come to help us to drive the deployment of electric vehicles and deployment of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. But before we go into further explanation of what it is, I would like to hand it off to you, Bart, so you can introduce our panelists.
Great. Thank you so much, Oleg. And my name is Bart Seidels. I'm with Hubject in the US office, focusing very much on helping implement and raise awareness and educate on ISO 15118 standard through CCS. But what we have gathered today is really a fantastic panel of experts across the board. We hopefully have 2 additional panelists that will be joining us from the States, so we're going to try and get them on. But first, starting the panelists here from left to right, we have Christian Giraudeau. He's been the electrification director with British Petroleum, with BP, for the past 5 years, after having established Schneider Electric's business for electric vehicle chargers. In addition to working with large corporations, Christian has experience in running startup companies in telecom, semiconductors, software, both in the United States and in Europe, with large commercial developments in China and other parts of Asia and Africa. Next, we have Christian Hahn. Christian joined Hubject in 2012 and was appointed CEO of Hubject GmbH in January 2015. He primarily focuses on strategy and the expansion of Hubject's global daughter companies in the United States, Hubject Inc., which I'm part of, and our office in China. His career began with ThyssenKrupp and Daimler, following 6 years at PricewaterhouseCoopers in Berlin, where he specialized in consulting and other energy supply businesses. Next to Christian, we have Andreas Heinrich. Andreas is a development engineer at Daimler AG with a focus on information and communication technologies. During the preparation process of the ISO 15118 documentation, he was project team leader for coordinating the requirement definitions on communication protocols in the ISO 15118-2 document. As a development engineer at Daimler, he's responsible for integrating the CCS charging communication into Mercedes-Benz EQ vehicles and for ensuring the interoperability between the EV and the infrastructure. And then next to Andreas, we have a local here, Jean Lasserre. Jean is an electrical engineer by training and holds degrees in France and Japan, as well as an MBA from INSEAD, where he spends most of his professional life in the IT and telecoms and other various management positions in Asia and Europe before joining Hager, where he leads the strategy, innovation, and business development team, focusing the company's efforts towards energy transition, such as electromobility, EV chargers, storage, and energy management. And on the far left, or the far right, is Dr. Mark Moulton. Over the last decade, Mark has become a recognized e-mobility expert after developing a widely used open source implementation of ISO 15118 called RISE V2G, and co-authoring the ISO 15118 and related international standards. He now works with companies and research institutions across the globe to integrate ISO 15118's promising plug-and-charge feature into their products and innovation. And he's been on a mission to help bring convenient, secure, and user-friendly EV charging to the global audience. So, as I mentioned, we also have 2 panelists that are dialing in. I'm not quite sure if they've been able to join. Oh, we do, and there's Eric. Eric, welcome. So, Eric Bach is the Vice President of Hardware Engineering at Lucid Motors. He is responsible for all hardware engineering and is integral in the product management and corporate planning for Lucid. In 18 years of leadership, Eric has guided numerous vehicles to markets for both Volkswagen and Tesla models, including engineering functions for both the Tesla S, X, and 3 programs. His unique experience blends deep experience from high-volume original equipment manufacturers with agile execution of technology-forward industry challenges. So Eric is joining us from the Lucid Motor headquarters in Newark, California, Northern California. And our last panelist is Rustem Koher. Rustem, hopefully he can hear us, and we'll get his image in a second. Rustem is the Daimler Trucks North America e-mobility ecosystem lead for utility engagement and leads the standardization effort for the high-power charging commercial vehicle CharIN task force. He is a firm believer in the electrification of transportation as an important step towards addressing global climate change. And Rustem wrote his master thesis in 2013 on how to increase public adoption of electric vehicles and fell in love with the concept, the concept of electrification, and has applied it in his own life. With solar panels on his roof at home, he has 2 EVs in the garage. He says he drives on sunshine, and he hasn't purchased gasoline in over 8 years. So, Rustem, it's great to have you. Hopefully, we will get him up, and he will his image and him to participate. Rustem is joining us from Portland, Oregon, from the headquarters of Daimler Trucks North America. So, I think that is a pretty broad and diverse group of experts that we have here, Oleg.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank our panelists.
Yes. Thank you very much.
It takes time, effort, and dedication to be a part of it, so thank you for participating. And truly, as Bart just said, this is a worldwide effort. We're developing technology, and we develop the standard for the worldwide use. So it is very important to note that all of our panelists come from basically everywhere around the globe. So before we go further, I also would like to make sure that we gave proper thank you to sponsors of this event. So premier sponsor of this event, of course, as you can guess, is Hager. We're now in this beautiful Hager forum here in Aubernay in France. And Jean, thank you for supporting this event, and thank you for making it possible.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It's the second time we organize this, and I hope to be able to organize many more.
Let's make it a tradition. And I also would like to thank CharIN Alliance, which is an alliance of close to 200 companies promoting a combined charging system as a global standard for EV charging, who is one of our key sponsors as well. And of course, Hubject and IoTecha and Clean Technica, who became sponsors of this event.
Yes.
So thank you all.
Yeah, thank you for the support.
And it's important to see so you can believe, right? We talk about technologies, but really, what does it mean from a practical sense? How does it look to me as a consumer? What does it do for me as a consumer? It's always a question that we need to find the right answer to. So we decided to, instead of showing you a lot of slides, which we didn't prepare for today at all, let's have a real conversation, but more importantly, let's have a discussion based on real facts. So earlier today, before we started this webinar, we actually brought in a very beautiful car that you will see in a few minutes. And we just did plug-and-charge. We plugged it into Hager charger. It connected to IoTecha cloud and connected to Hubject ecosystem. And all of a sudden, without doing much from a consumer point of view, we had a full chain working the way it's supposed to. So without further interruption, I would like to share with you the video. Is the video ready? Let's roll it in. So I would like to invite everybody together around the car, how plug-and-charge actually works in reality.
Okay, it's pretty easy. So you have the plug and you just put it in. And then you see the light turning from a white blinking to a green blinking light, and then you charge. So that's the magic.
And that is the main point of the simplicity and the ease of use of the plug-and-charge. If you notice the slide went from green to blue, it means that the car started to charge. We didn't do anything, right? We just plugged the cord, nothing more. We get in touch from the charger, now that the cable is plugged and the car is recognized, into the cloud, provided also by IoTecha. And from our cloud, we have an integration to Hubject ecosystem. And through this integration with Hubject ecosystem, now we can issue the contract certificate that basically, for the lack of a better term, seals the transaction. And this contract certificate will be used by the car to start the charging process, and now it can be also used by the service provider to essentially record the transaction. as we discussed, it's an ecosystem. And in ecosystem, it's not just up to one company to make it work. It takes multiple parties collaborating together. So what do you think? Was it cool or what? I think it was pretty cool. Seeing is believing, and that's why it was so important for us to show you how all of this complex functionality can be actually implemented in a very simple way, and in a way that basically looks like magic, right? You just plug it in and something works. If you're a fan of science fiction, you probably remember the statement by Arthur C. Clarke, who said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So with CCS and ISO IEC 15118, we make this magic to happen. And that leads me to my first question to the panel. I would like to address this question to Rustam, Eric, Jean, and Christian Girardot. So we'll have dispatch today between the two Christians. The reason I'm addressing this question to you, gentlemen, is because it's actually a business question. How do you see combined charging system with ISO IEC 15118 helping your business, creating the value, creating attractive features for your customers? How do you see it as a component of the value creation for you as an operator, as a technology or equipment provider, as OEM? How do you see it? Who would like to start?
Well, can you hear me?
Yep. Eric, go ahead.
All right, great. So we particularly see it as a value because we want to deliver a seamless charging experience, a seamless user experience to our customers. And charging is a vital part of the daily life of electric cars. Well, if you have a long-range vehicle like ours with 400 miles of EPA 5-cycle range, maybe not a daily interaction you'll have to have, but we want to make it nevertheless as seamless as possible. Plug-and-Charge is an incredibly important feature for us. That's globally, not just in Europe, where you're sitting right now, but also particularly in the US. Worry-free, one billing contract, plug into the car and just play and use.
Excellent. Anybody else?
Yeah, Oleg, so Christian speaking. So at BP, we want to provide the most convenient and fastest network possible to the customer with the best services possible, right? So one of the key matter here is to provide that services the best way. So clearly providing a simple way to authenticate, to issue pricing and manage payments or billing is key. The second part of it is value-added services you can derive from contract management. If you're a fleet manager, right, and if you have a fleet of so many vehicles, right, you may want to have some simple tools to manage that fleet, right? So today you do it for the fuel card or the fuel car. So we have a big business in that space. Moving into the EV space, we will need to do that as well and take advantage of the digital space with cyber-secured certificates to make it happen. So it's really key for that. The last piece of it is really the advanced dynamic load management and pricing that you can issue for the benefit of the customer, also for the benefits to have a sustainable business in the future. And last but not least, but also there is a threat into fully digital world, is to still hone the customer relationships and make sure we can satisfy the customer, have as many as possible touch point to the customer. That's key for us. Today we have 50 million customers each day going to a BP gas station or forecourt, depending which pond on the side of the Atlantic you are, that going every day to a BP gas station. And so we want to take advantage of that big customer phase and build on that customer base as well.
Excellent, thank you.
You asked me my opinion about that, how CCS and 15 are very important to us. It's very simple. You started by talking about magic, but everybody knows there is no magic. Behind the magic, there's a lot of work. There's a lot of things to master. And for us, for Hager, if we want to sell and to be successful in the future, we need to provide products which are extremely simple. Our customers are not the types of people who want to read papers and papers, and they cannot do it. So for us, without this kind of, technology, without this ISO 15118, we could not possibly develop really this business. And we think it's absolutely indispensable to do so. So that's why we jump on this kind of thing, and that's why we enter a conversation with you and all the people here. We need to simplify the system even better, even more than now, in order to make sure that the entire market picks up, and we are, of course, let's say, successful in this new market.
Thank you very much. Very interesting.
Rustam, do you want to add?
I don't have a whole lot more to add than what the previous speaker said. Robust, functioning, smooth 15118 is very, very important for fleet vehicles, whether they be trucks or cars. It has to be seamless. It has to be robust. It has to work every time, and it's vitally important for fleet vehicles.
So continuing on from kind of a business, 15118 is very much the standard technology, creating that secure communication between the electric vehicle and the charging station. So clearly there's the business, because the various entities that are involved want to develop this into something, a model that is sustainable. But of course, we always have to remember that we have to fall back on technical level. So for the three other panelists here, Andreas, Christian, and Mark, we'd be interested, how do you reflect on the evolution and the technical elements to support these business aspects that have been discussed here, or how you see that being implemented on a business point, but being supported on the technical side? Christian, if you want to, or Andreas, please.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So I think there was a word magic. I think the magic begins here with a standard or with an open system. So CCS is an open system, so a lot of stakeholders can join the system. It's not a closed proprietary system, and I think this makes the magic possible, because you can have a good market for it. And I think the second thing is that we have a single interface, which is the ISO 15118, for controlling everything between the car and the EVSE. So you have a clear interface between the car and the EVSE.
So that being a common standard, so that people can rely on that being a standard rather than multiple as being the connector and that communication.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's more or less the connector for the communication. And I think it combines two different major things. It is, on the one hand, it's control of charging, but also enables services like Plug&Charge and load balancing. And this is quite unique for this standard. It could have been different. It could have been 3 standards, which would be very different to handle in the car, for example.
And then probably not greater implementation if there's uncertainty, if there's multiple standards.
Yeah, you have to describe everything between the standards. So this is a unique thing for the ISO 15118, that it covers services and the charge control. And I think this is an advantage for OEMs, because they have to consider only a single interface, and it helps to enhance interoperability, which is, again, for me, the basis for a good user experience.
Christian, you want to pick up on that, because interoperability is very important.
Sure, definitely. I think the reason why we are discussing the topic of ISO 15118, very technical name, is that we are now seeing that the e-mobility market is starting to lift up. So we all know it took us years to come to this point, but now it's definitely happening. We all are quite sure on this. But that also means that we will see thousands, 100,000, millions of electric vehicles are driving around all over the world. And this means we need to think about how we can establish a secure communication between the charging station and the electric vehicle, but also how we can establish scalable processes, because we will face a situation that many thousands, 100,000 charging stations will take place every day. And then we need to have a solution in place, a standard in place, hopefully, which enables all market participants to communicate as easy as possible, as simple as possible with each other. And I think that's one of the main arguments for using one, hopefully sooner or later, global standard to reduce complexity and to enable scalable solutions, because yes, we are seeing many, many electric vehicles, but if you would spend a lot of money and a lot of resources to establish interoperability, that would kill all business models. So therefore, we need to establish something which can be used by everyone in the market. Therefore, standards are relevant, are needed. And of course, now we need to start implementing it. We have seen great examples today how it can be done. But of course, it's not only about Porsche and Hager, unfortunately. We need to invite hundreds of companies all over Europe, all over the world, to join us in implementing this standard.
Mark, you have comments on probably maybe even more technical?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to point out the focus on security as it evolves over time. You know, with a few electric vehicles in the market, no one really focuses much on secure communication. I mean, hackers only find a target interesting if you can hack with one attack millions of devices or thousands or what, you know. Now, as we have more and more big companies bringing cars to the market like VW, there's going to be a bigger focus on security. I mean, 2 years ago, the Chaos Computer Club clearly showed in its December session how easy it is to hack a charging station, how faulted these RFID devices are, the RFID cards, how easily you can hack them. And with the ISO 15118 standard, we have a very up-to-date security system in place with digital certificates that guarantee that messages are secure, that there are digital signatures involved. We have a encrypted communication on the communication layer, on the data transfer layer with TLS. So this is very important because I think no one wants run into the risk that, for example, someone else hacks your charging account and then someone else charges on behalf of your account. Or since the car is connected to a critical infrastructure, you don't want to risk any blackouts if a hacker is attacking thousands of cars at the same, you know, transformer space. So this is a thing that especially implementers like to, at first hand, avoid in the first place because security is complex. Anytime when you want to combine complexity and user-friendliness, or a complex system and user-friendliness, it has to be secure. And I'm happy that focus is increased more and more now, especially with a system like Hubject being in place that can roll out Plug&Charge into the field.
Maybe I can also add something for security. This is also for me very unique in the standard. Basically, it's a charging standard. You want to charge with this standard. So the communication is for controlling the charging. But with adding additional services like, for example, Plug&Charge, we have different information in there that might be more critical. And therefore, we needed different mechanisms to protect them. And therefore, the 15118 applies this security, all the security mechanisms that we need. And the interesting thing is, so since the beginning, the ISO included all parties that we need for the system, not only car manufacturers, but also every stakeholder in the grid. And what you see in the 15118 today is the best consensus between both sides. It's not only the side of the OEM or the grid side. So it could have been easier to define it maybe, but if you see at the PKI, for example, the reason why it is like it is also to have all these roles in the market and to address them with a certain requirements they have. For example, to decouple the OEM route from the mobility route. That's one of the aspects that we considered.
No, this is actually a great lead on, and Jean, you inspired me to ask a question. You mentioned that magic takes a lot of time. So, Andreas, I would like to ask back at you this question. People think, well, this standard just appeared yesterday and everyone is using it all of a sudden. But I think it's important to share with our audience what it took time-wise and interrupt testing-wise to actually arrive at the standard. So maybe you would like to comment.
You mean the implementation or building the standard?
Building the standard from the very beginning and then
maybe a short history on 15118.
Very short.
I take not too much time. So I looked it up and I was a little bit shocked because it's already started in 2008 There were the very first discussions between RWE and Daimler that we need a standard. It was totally clear at that point in time that a closed system is not the goal. The open system was the goal. At that time, there was no Type 2 connector. There was nothing else. So there were 3 meetings before starting the ISO for inviting a lot of companies and find out what are the needs. And again, it was from the grid side and from the OEM side. And then after 3 meetings, we had some basic requirements, and then the ISO took over. And then the ISO was started in 2009. So it's nearly 10 years ago, and we considered already a lot of things that we have today. Just as a comparison, the iPhone is nearly 10 years. So yes. It was somehow in the same range when the iPhone started. So we had totally different infrastructure for wireless communication and so on. So it was totally different, but a lot of aspects are still valid today. And for example, the security system is still valid for the roles that you see. Maybe you can reduce them, but they enable to have these roles, and I think this is important.
Maybe one remark from my side regarding the standards and why we are so pushy and so positive about standardization. The big challenge is, of course, as we already have heard today, that the mobility market is a very complex one. We're using a lot of technical terms, we're using a lot of roles and names for the topics we're talking about. And that also means that there are a lot of different solutions in the market, a lot of different ways how you can achieve something. And of course, maybe Plug&Charge could be achieved with a different approach much easier, maybe. But the question is, of course, and that's the importance of standards, what is a secure investment from all the companies in the market, which is the technology which will not only be used this year, but also next year and maybe in 5 years, because companies like the company from Christian, they are investing for the next years, so therefore they need to decide which technology will also be in use in 10 years or at least 5 years in the future, that they don't need to reinvest again after 1, 2, 3 years. And that's a reason why we all need to have, at least for some specific topics, standards in place to have a high security for doing the needed investments. And of course also to not being forced to replace something before before the investment is paid back. And that's a reason why I would say the whole industry is pushing so strongly on ISO 15118, because that's a valuable standard for very specific use cases, which will play a very important role in the future. First one is Plug&Charge, plugging in and start the charging session. As we heard, that's the most convenient, most seamless customer experience, but also additional services like smart charging. Yes, we all know in the future we need to take care of the electric vehicles when they are connected to the electricity grid. In some areas more, in some areas less, but in all cases we need to think about if and how we could control the charging power of the car. And therefore again, we need standards, because there are even more players involved in this use case, because then we need to keep in mind that the electricity companies, hundreds of them, thousands of them all over Europe, also play an important role, and therefore we need standards to reduce complexity by using these kind of things we are talking about today. Yeah.
Well, those are great points. And actually, we have questions already starting to come in from the audience. And by the way, so everyone knows, we had close to 700 registrations for this webinar. So I guess this topic, it really has quite a gravity and importance in everybody's mind. So I'm glad to see that people would like to be a part of this conversation. And one of the questions actually came in related to, okay, we have a standard. We have a global standards that we can use. How do we actually verify that this standard works, right? And as you pointed out, Andreas, it was initially the effort actually coming from both sides. It's coming from OEMs and also from electricity provider. So we already have this new collaborations that is taking place today, right? And I think this is a fundamental change. So maybe we'll talk a bit later about charging a horse, Christian, if you don't mind. But first, I would like to actually touch on how do we assure interoperability? How do we, in practice, achieve that? And I think it's important for our listeners today to know what has been done over the years in interop testing. How long had it begun? How often it has happened and how often it happens now. Mark, so if you'd like to talk about it maybe.
Sure. So so there are two aspects you need to distinguish. One is interoperability and one is conformance, right? So when two implementers of the same standard, let's say a car manufacturer and a charging station manufacturer, when they are interoperable, no, when they are compatible to each other, interoperable, that is fine, but it doesn't mean that they are interoperable with other players in the market as well. That is why it's so important to test conformity to the standard, right? And luckily, there are already conformance test system providers established in the market. It all started back in 2014. I think 5 years ago, we had the first interoperability and conformance testing event in Dortmund. The TU Dortmund, where we have a spin-off from, it's called Verisco, they organized this event and they keep organizing it until today. And this has been a huge help for the market.
And the next one is next one is this week.
Yes, actually this week
in the Netherlands.
In Netherlands. Yeah.
And I think that there are over 50 companies that will be bringing equipment. 13 auto OEMs are going to be represented and bringing more, at least 10, like 15 cars, and I think 20 different charging stations or ECUs. So it's a great place to really have that testing.
That's huge,
people coming together.
If you happen to have the video from the last event in Arnhem, you could show it, but I'm not sure if you have that proof.
You know what?
Anyway.
I have an idea. We can actually send the link to all of the attendees so they can actually enjoy and see what happened in Arnhem. But actually, I would like to point out, probably when you hear Arnhem, well, you can say it's a European event, but it's actually not true. It's an international event. And what is very important to know is that the previous test event actually happened in US. It happened in Reston, Virginia, and it was hosted by Electrify America. And guess what? I can tell you that the event after Arnhem will take place also in US. And Eric, maybe you would like to say how Lucid is planning to host it.
Yeah, thanks, Oleg, for the intro. Absolutely. So in April, I think it's the week of the 27th of April, we're inviting everybody that's interested and has hardware to test to the West Coast interoperability event, testicle, testival, as you call it here. And we have that here in our Lucid headquarters in Newark. We'll have our beta fleet also testing the EVSE equipment and hope to see many of our fellow competitors on our grounds. I think it'll be a all-encompassing event, including the CharIN conference and the CharIN focus days.
Now, this is excellent. So as you can see, it's really a very strong international background for us trying to drive this interoperability forward. And I think, Rustam, it's fair to say that one of the reasons why the multi-megawatt charging effort started under CharIN Alliance is basically the desire to draw from the experience of what has been done before enabling this interoperable ecosystem. If you'd like to comment regarding that at all.
Yeah, it was a natural fit for the Megawatt Plus Charging Task Force or High Power Commercial Vehicle Charging Task Force. CharIN already has a good set of resources and a good network, which we built upon as we progress towards defining our requirements and then defining what that standard will be.
And of course, it will benefit in the future from essentially the same experience with interrupt testing. Like as an example, already in Arnhem, we will see at least one truck present.
I just wanted to add to how many times, because you asked how many events did you already have. It started 5 years ago, and it's a biannual event. So it always changes between Asia, Europe, and North America. And I think this is now the 13th event.
It's the 13th, yes.
So there's a lot of history and a lot of interoperability testing that's already taken place.
We've got some questions coming in. Please submit questions for the webinar attendees. One about the testable, says that there's been testables in the US and in Europe. What about Asia? I think that there was actually a testing symposium, not quite as big, but the idea is CharIN, who is now the organizer of all the testing symposiums, is including Asia. So it's very important, and we think that this is a global issue, and CCS being implemented across the Asian regions. And they just had, I think, a testing symposium. Was it in India?
In India and in Korea as well.
In India and Korea.
Yes.
So that's we're expanding that. Another question that came in with talking about smart charging. Let's see. No, hold on. There's the. We'll go here, and then I'm gonna get these questions as they come up because they're moving by fast.
Sure, no problem. So we talked about technology, right? And we talked about what it took to develop it, and now we have this global platforms that spans really across the continents, as we just realized. So what do you think still exists in terms of barriers to the adoption? What do you see as major roadblocks that we still have to overcome as challenges on our path? Anybody would like to talk about it?
Diesel subsidiaries, for example.
Okay.
Way overdue.
Yes?
Perception of the market. The perception already lags behind the reality. What we are discussing today here, the general public does not feel it yet. I think he will feel probably, next year when he sees a lot of advertising on TV with a new electric vehicle coming in, or out rather, and start asking questions to his dealership. What about this? How it works? But so far they still have a feeling that electric car is something clearly coming, but maybe in 3, 4, 5 years. Well, actually, I think it's now pretty much ready to make a big splash even next year, probably, by 2020. So I think the perception lags a little bit behind, but these things can change very quickly. Huh?
I think what we are still missing in the market is adoption. I think that's very important. We see, again, some products are in the market who are able to speak ISO 15108 and Plug&Charge. But of course, we would love to see more companies joining us on this topic. As Hubject ourselves, we started to set up this solution in 2014. So 5 years now, and of course we learned a lot, and we spend a lot of time and resources in understanding how we can offer a service which is reliable, but also done in a way that it's appreciated by the market. And we would love to get more support by the market companies. Yes, we know that some companies are now starting, and you can see it in the news. More and more announcements are done. Especially one announcement last week from the US market, which is very important and impressive for us. But of course, we would love to see more companies joining the whole global development, because then we could learn much easier from each other. And that's the reason why we are big supporters of the festivals or testing symposiums, because that's a perfect place how we could easily exchange information and experiences to create something better altogether. But of course, we also know that this only works if everyone is bringing something in, and therefore we would like to invite many, many more companies all over the world to join us on our path, to really start implementing ISO 15108, and then to learn out of our experiences. We are more than happy as Hubject to share our experiences, but we would love to get more feedback, more experiences from other companies.
I think what the customer is looking for is to have a system which is a car and a charging experience that's very close to what they know today with the ICE car. Not saying that it should be the same, but customer expectation that thing needs to be simple, right? And there may be people that want to still charge home, right? But there are also people that wants to charge fast when they are on the way, or they may stay idle for a while, staying in the parking. So we need to provide a wide array of services for those customers, and then the digital interface linked to the physical world, exactly as you mentioned this morning, Oleg, in your presentation, is key to the success, right? There's a few car OEMs joining the bandwagons now. I think everyone knows Tesla has been demonstrated quite a good experience for the customer, going from ultra-fast charging and supercharger from 120 kilowatt charging to 250 kilowatt right now with Tesla Model 3 version 3. But also you can charge at home, you can charge in other public space. So I think all the car OEMs, and I think Daimler is working in that direction a lot already, and others as well, providing the service to the customer as an end-to-end solution, premium services. That's where it's going to take off. And that's ISO 15008, Plug&Charge indeed will help doing that.
So I was just going to almost ask that question directly to you. This is a question that came in. To achieve decarbonization targets for road transportation, we need to convince consumers to choose fully electric vehicles. The key is to make EV seamless to use. I think that you answered that as kind of that user experience and making all the different elements. So I'm looking at the questions that are coming in. I was going to ask that directly of you, Christian, but I think that that really does. Anything else in terms of the decarbonization? Because I think obviously for people see BP, and it's not the normal company that is in the whole electrification of transportation in kind of these early days, but it makes total sense because of your presence and the ability to make big changes. So maybe just a comment on how BP is looking at this and helping the electrification.
So globally, BP has a low carbon program. It's not only looking at electrification of the car and transportation of car. We're also doing quite a lot of works in biofuels, for instance, which is a lower carbon emission. As an example, we are working on the aircraft industry, providing fuels from waste management. So instead of wasting the waste, basically, right? So recycling the waste into kerosene. That's one example. So it's many more examples like that. We need to understand that the world is going to need more and more energy in the futures. And by the way, there'll be more and more people living in a bigger city, larger city. So we have to square the circle with the increase of energy and lowering the carbon footprint. So we're working on it. Electrification in one pass for the transportation passenger car. That's not the only one. We're working on it.
One comment I wanted to add on the term on the security and the roadblocks. In last years when I've been consulting companies on ISO 15118, I realized that the biggest hesitation comes from the complexity of implementing it, especially when it comes to Plug&Charge. Because when it comes to cryptography, many people say, oh, no, do we really have to do that? Isn't there an easier way? But when you want to have a system that is easy to use and that is as complex as the ISO 15118 is, you need to make it secure. The thing is, you don't have to implement everything from scratch. There is a lot of work done already. There is, for example, there is open source implementation for ISO 15118 for both charging station and the EV. As Barton said, it's called RISE V2G, that's one thing. But happily, we also have like the infrastructure provider already as Hubject here. We have the roots CA instances that are providing the services that you need. And there are providers in the market, for example, like also EB and Bender, who provide controllers that are already certified for ISO 15118, that work with smart, that have been verified. So you don't have to start from scratch. There is a lot available, and there are partners in the market that help you understand and break down the complexity, such as Hubject and also myself.
No, I think it's a great. Sorry, Eric.
Sorry, if I may. Please. So we're talking the technicality of what makes our life simpler, right? So ISO 15118 as the charging standard with all the benefits coming in the future. Number one, of course, security, as was just highlighted. It's one of the foundational cornerstones of something that is scalable and will be adopted by our customers. The increase of adoption we primarily see due to diversification of offerings, and that is great products, great cars that customers actually want to drive. If they hit the shop floors and they're starting to roll out by our fellow competitors, so will we end of 2020. Those products will be adopted, and with their adoption, they are going to further the rollout of the CCS standard. So the CCS standard for us is one of the key bases to having a scalable rollout of many, many millions of electric vehicles. And that will then also help with decarbonization. We can utilize our sun, especially here in California and other places, to generate electricity rather than having to burn fossil fuels. We can use the fossil fuels for better means. If we look at technical polymers and other great products that need it. But we really embrace the CCS standard as an enabler for the rollout of more great products.
Rustam, if you want to jump in, Rustam, because I think decarbonization is one thing, and we're thinking often about passenger vehicles, but fleets have a very big business model use case with 15.11a plug-and-charge, but also with smart charging. You've been leading the high-powered charging commercial vehicle group, getting charging up to 2 megawatts. Any comments on the use of 15.11a or how you see CCS and 15.11a being an enabler for fleets?
For sure. Thanks, Barton. I did want to point out, as we talk about these sorts of things, that we don't simply talk about cars. We also talk about all vehicles. So instead of saying cars, we should say vehicles, because trucks are included in that entire matrix. So don't forget about the trucks. In fact, some of the trucks on the road are the biggest polluters today. So 15.11a will be extremely important to adoption for the fleets. And for any fleet that wants to put in charging infrastructure, they want to know that that infrastructure will last them and be supported and be robust and will be able to be used with all vehicles at all times. And so the 15.11a and the standard, as it's defined, needs to be compatible with all vehicles, and all vehicles need to be capable and able to use 15.11a for charging. No fleet manager, no fleet owner will install infrastructure if they're not confident they can be used for all their vehicles.
I think this is a fantastic point, and I would like to build on what was said by Mark, what you said about ecosystem, Eric, what you said about scalability of the market and upwards momentum resulting from scalability. And Rustam, what you said, it has to be for all vehicles of all kinds, because that's where scalability is driven by, right? If you start building a charger that may be used by 1,000 trucks of one operator, the cost of this infrastructure will be enormous. It's not affordable to anybody. But if we can leverage the infrastructure that has already been deployed and used for other types of vehicles, all of a sudden we have an opportunity to charge anything from motorcycle to a very, very heavy commercial truck. And now we have the benefit of this scalable market. But I think what it takes to deliver a scalable market, it is collaboration of multiple parties. It's very clear that we have a very biodiverse ecosystem here. We have people who love motorcycles and drive them. We have people who drive cars. We have trucks. We have buses. We have other vehicles, maybe aircraft at some point. And we already have examples of aircraft being charged with basically CCS connector. So, Jean, maybe I would like to turn the question to you. So you as a host of this event today, and one of the things that we did before the start of the webinar is actually a demonstration of Plug&Charge that we showed a video of. And truly, it was a collaboration of multiple parties. So you, as a manufacturer of chargers coming to market, how do you see the importance of this collaboration and the ability to leverage components that come from so many players and become a complete ecosystem product?
Well, it's very simple, in fact. When we started digging and studying this kind of problem about 3 years ago, the first thing we realized that we could not do anything serious alone. First of all, we are by far probably the smallest of all companies around here, for sure. But even if we are a big company, it's too complex. And another thing, if you want to do everything by yourself, even if you have a lot of money, people, will attack you. They would not want to have this kind of domination. And fundamentally, we came to the conclusion, no, it cannot work. We have to collaborate. And not only we have to collaborate, but we want to make this collaboration a strength. In a nutshell, I remember I talked to Daniel, my CEO, my boss, say, Daniel, you are smallest, you should be the more open. the one who is willing, and not only willing, the one who will discuss with everybody and implement, really something open. And in fact, we came to even to an extreme solution in which what we call our energy management system. We are still today thinking about putting in for free in our systems, open to anybody from outside, so you can run your software, you can run it. Because even if it's free, but you use it, we can make it standard, we can implement it everywhere. And of course, I hope that if you use it, we can get something out of it. But then you can really accelerate it. So collaboration is a must. Let me add something about decarbonization, because also what we thought, extremely important that will help us to deploy the thing is this decarbonization thing. When you look at the cost of producing electricity today through solar or even wind, especially offshore wind, the costs are decreasing still dramatically. For example, offshore wind production cost has decreased by 89% within the last 5 years, and the trend is going on. Today, it is about 2 times even less cheaper to produce, only to produce electricity from renewable rather than burning coals or even nuclear. So which means even if you add the cost of storage plus energy management grid scale, like you mentioned, it's already at par, more or less. So the tipping point is there. Then it's unstoppable. That will push a lot of pressure to create this market. And then, of course, standards are absolutely necessary. Secured standard, scalable standard, because then we are talking about massive thing. And say, okay, we have to go for what we think will be the best. And that's where we are entered this thing. So for us, collaboration is key. And also collaboration with people we never thought about, working with. After all, as a Hager, we didn't think about having collaboration with OEM, honestly, only for. But now we are surrounded by you, and actually we're very pleased of that. And I hope we have more, because I think there's a for the common good, and everybody has to win in here. Because the most important thing we should not forget that the world needs more energy, the world needs more power all the time, and it will be electricity. It will be electricity in the long run. It will take decades, but we have ahead of us maybe 3 or 4 decades of growth, actually, if we can tackle it.
Yeah, please.
Maybe I just want to give one sentence again to what Mark already said, this to have modules maybe or components that have a ready to implement, let me say it in this way, ready to implement solution for another company. This would be very helpful, and it starts already. Some years ago, everybody implemented everything on its own, and it's somehow a pain, but it's necessary to have the standard that we have. For example, for security. We could do it easily without security, but that's not the goal. And if you want to have the security, you need some effort to spend for it. And if it is too complex, there the standard has the advantage that you have tools and modules and whatever, so you have a modular system and then you can just assemble it. And then you have a next industry that's just assembling it. And I think this is one key to bring it to the market, that not everybody is doing it on its own, but you have some kind of modular system.
So as we saw from the demonstrations this morning, that's exactly the case.
Right. This was in this direction.
We had a system assembled out of components that were brought together from Hubject, from IoTecha, from Hager, from Porsche, and all of a sudden we have end-to-end certificate provisioning that is simple.
But it applies also for tools,
exactly.
For testing tools,
exactly.
Like you offer. For example, testing a secured connection is not that easy if you don't have the key, exactly. Which is what you want. But if you have to test it on the street, you need some appropriate tools for it.
So to me, it basically means that as an industry, we still have quite a bit of work to do on the technical side, and maybe even governance side, to improve the usability of the standard, improve the usability of technology. As an example, you just mentioned, how do we test, how do we sniff the information if we don't have the key, right? So maybe there is an opportunity to create a test that is cloud connected to backend and allows you to do something when you need to do it.
Yeah, whatever helps to improve the interoperability and the conformance to the standard helps to improve the user experience from my point of view. That's the first thing. And everything else is technology. So whatever it is, it can be, I don't know, like what is CharIN doing, offering a test event where everybody can come and do it for its own responsibility. Yeah. That's okay. And it helps already to see if their own implementation or what I did is conform to the standard and it is interoperable to a different other station, for example, for a car.
I totally agree with you. As basically providers of technology components, we all can benefit from more testing, right? And today we have probably, what, 2-3 test events a year, 2-3 festivals, but if we can do more and more often, it's probably is beneficial and has value to all of us because it improves interoperability, so it's a very worthwhile investment.
And when we started, we tested each car against each station. In the beginning it was possible because we have a few cars and few stations. Now it's already starting that we have new stations, new cars, and at some point in time it would be either not possible or it's too costly to do it.
Yes.
So you need somehow a conformance test and an interoperability test, like a golden test device to ensure it's not a golden test device, it's a conformance test. Yeah?
It's a conformance.
But a specification that gives you some level of interoperability already. And then you have maybe some additional tests, but this is the basis for a good interoperability here.
So we need to achieve this minimum level of interoperability to
From my point of view, yes. Otherwise, you will experience in the field.
Yeah.
And maybe to add one point to this discussion, which is very valuable, we should not only focus on the, let's say, technical communication and technical testing, but also, and that's maybe even more important in the future, we should define some guidelines, business rules, however you want to call it, how we are collaborating between each other. And just to explain it a bit more detail, we already used the term root CA, V2G root CA, which is also called the central trust anchor in the Plug&Charge ecosystem. Right now, there are not that many companies operating such a V2G root CA, but definitely in the future we will see more companies offering these kind of services. But what does it mean to offer these kind of services? Which level of security they need to establish internally in their own organization, for example? What do they need to fulfill as a company to be able to offer this kind of service is today completely unsettled. And the first discussions are already started solving this topic. But again, we can only invite the market players to support us on these kind of discussions, because if it's not solved jointly, we will face a lot of discussions and we are facing acceptance issues. So therefore, again, like we already did from a technical perspective, it should also be done from a organizational perspective, that we are defining the business rules. What does it mean to operate a root CA, but also a PKI and all these other topics we talked about, that we should define it jointly.
Okay, Oleg, you're asking question. Now my turn, I'm going to ask a question to you.
Please.
So China is the largest market today, probably is going to be the largest in the future. What about ISO 15118 in China, especially given a server needs to be hosted in China, security should be hosted in China. What's happening in China over there? Are we going to have them on the same bandwagon, or are they going to go their own way?
Well, it's a very interesting question and difficult one to answer.
Thank you.
Today, as you know, China has a standard that is very similar to ISO 15118, but slightly different. So it's modified for the domestic use. But I also can tell you that I know that there are companies and organizations that are using ISO 15118 or planning to use it in China for their vehicles. So it's true. So we'll see where China will end at the end of the day. In my opinion, we will experience probably on the long run some differences between China standards and the rest of the world, as we see in some other areas as an example, but telecom converged. So my hope is that maybe even in the area of electric vehicles, we will see, or EVs, I should say, right? Vehicles of any kind, we will see convergence with China as well. But I think it's a longer process. And I also think that it will greatly depend on how much acceleration we will experience here in the deployment of the infrastructure. If our market becomes stronger, I mean, CCS market in Europe, North America, South America, big parts of Asia, actually, already in Korea, as an example, is becoming CCS market. So if this market starts accelerating forward, it probably will give more reasons for China market to converge with CCS.
Let's get a few questions in from the webinar attendees. There's quite a few technical ones, which I'm using this panel as a resource for getting answers. I'm going to throw two of them together. What ISO 15118, oh, excuse me, why should ISO 15118 be implemented, only implemented with CCS and not with a normal type 2? Question one. And what is missing in the standard to be completed, or is it already finished? What other parts still need to be improved? So I think probably Andreas and Mark can answer those.
If I got it right, there is a question if I can combine 15118 with a Type 2 connector. Is it right?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is basically supported. It was actually it was the first use case. When we started in 2009, this was the only use case. And at that time, there was already the idea that we need extension for the existing AC plug for having DC fast charging or high power. And the idea was to reuse the upper part or the part of the AC for charge control, PWM, and add some DC pins. So it was in there from the beginning. It was the original use case, so you can do it. But the more interesting question is if it is really limited only to CCS. And I think it's not, because, for example, CharIN is already starting to discuss what they call ACD, automated connection devices, or automated charging or automated plugging. Different words at the moment are used, but in the end you want to plug automatically. Because imagine if you have an automatic driving car, it's not so funny to plug it in afterwards if it comes home. And I think to have some automatic plugging process is very interesting. And now imagine you need some authentication. You need again something that is automated. You don't want to swipe a RFID card after it's automated plugged. So I think the 15118 can also be used for other services, and we already on the way in the -20, which is the successor of the -2 document, the next version, where we define wireless power transfer and also the ACD solution. So it's a different kind of connector, but this nearly the same protocol, at least the protocol family. So you have the same functionality for that services. That's the idea.
Mark, maybe you want to comment on where things are with the standard. A lot of people, I was in the White Plains last week, and that was one of the questions, is understanding where the standard is right now.
Yeah, so the -20, as Andreas just pointed out, it's around the corner to be finished, basically. It's going to be next summer, I would say, let's say in the third quarter of next year. It will be finished as an international standard. So a standard always traverses different stages of the document, but the final international version will be
But does that mean that people have to wait? Because there's a standard already out there. There's been improvements of that draft. There's been implementations in Europe and in the United States. Those companies are...
We're talking about two standards of the same family, basically, right? So the -2 standard has been open to the public since 2014 and 2015, respectively, if you count in -3 for the lower parts of the communication. So that is already available since a lot of years. And we have been waiting since quite some time that companies pick up the standard and implement it. So luckily now we find some car companies like Daimler, Porsche, and Audi that are implementing it already with the Taycan and the Audi e-tron and the Smart and the EQC family, I guess. So we already have the standard available. No one has to wait. But there are some use cases that have not been specified in the -2, which is why we opened up the standard again and bring out the -20, which is, for example, wireless charging, as Andreas mentioned, the automated connection device especially for autonomously driving cars. And one more very important big topic is vehicle to grid, actually. So this means that the car is not only able to charge and being controlled in its charging process, but also able to feed energy back to the grid in order to stabilize the grid and help to, use as much renewable power as we can. This is
and
also
DER. Don't forget DER.
DER.
Demand response.
All right. Yeah, so, and this aspect has been defined as a use case in -1 already, but never been specified for requirements in -2. So that will be coming with -20 next year for both AC charging and DC charging, where it's more complex for AC charging, because there you need to exchange information between the charger and the car. So the car is acting responsibly when it feeds energy to the grid according to what is called the grid code. With DC charging, it's quite simple because the charging station doesn't move. You can implement the grid code right inside the charging station. Everything is set up. So this brings me to the conclusion that ISO 15118 is the standard that solves every use case you can think of. We have AC charging, we have DC charging, we have V2G charging, we have a charging of every kinds of vehicles, from cars to motorcycles to trucks to buses to even ships. So if you cannot come up with a use case that we haven't covered yet, I'm very interested to hear it.
So I think there is an interesting observation coming from online listeners. Basically, the point is very simple. It sounds from this discussion like all of you basically saying that the standard is evolving. The use cases are evolving. The industry is evolving. So nobody needs to really wait till the end of this process to start implementing something. The time to implement is now, and focus on what evolutionary steps, like as an example, you mentioned V2G, right? Vehicle to grid. How about vehicle to vehicle as an example transfer? There are many, many more ideas that will come down the pipe. Is that the correct assumption?
I think it's a common practice in standards to also develop in parallel to standardization. So then you really know what you want to standardize. It helps always to do something in reality if you want to specify something. It helps. You don't have to do, but it helps. However, if it comes to standards, you have to be aware that everything can change in the end. So it depends a little bit on what happens in the standard. If there's voting, for example, for some change, maybe it will come. And then you have to be so flexible that you can adapt to this in your final product to be interoperable. Otherwise, you have something maybe that is partly interoperable or there's no interoperability. And I think this, you can start early, also maybe with a -20, but in the end, you have to comply to the final standard. That's important. However you do it, updating, new product, whatever, is up to you, but you have to be aware. You cannot say, because the standard is in this and this stage, only FDIS, so the final draft international standard, only editorial things are allowed. But as long as the standard is not finished, you have to expect changes. That's, I think, what you have to consider.
So I think that brings up a very interesting point also. I think that brings a point that we probably should consider when we do our design, that the notion of a standalone disconnected charging station is probably something that should go away, because the reality of the matter is, if we would like to support flexible services like Plug&Charge or V2G or demand response, if we would like to be able to do updates with the evolution of the standardization and so forth, connectivity is becoming the first and the must feature. Am I correct?
I think so. So when we started, I already said this, when we started there was nearly no data, global cellular data network available. At least it was very cost intensive if you use it. Today it's different. So you can have different services that you can realize. You can have different use cases with that. Maybe you are always on with the EVSEs. That was not possible when we started the original 15118. And therefore we made a lot of definitions to allow also to have offline stations. But in the end, you always will have some use cases where you don't have connectivity. For example, if you just rely on a telematic link, maybe in a garage underground, you don't have any connection. You have to consider these use cases. Maybe you find solutions, but you cannot just say, okay, we have in all markets, in every place, we have this connectivity. So depending on your use case, you have to consider that.
Makes sense.
Just want to comment on this connectivity thing. Especially when you have a charging station installed in a garage. There you don't have a wireless connection, of course, but you could have maybe an Ethernet installation, which might also be a costly thing to do if that hasn't been implemented from the beginning when the building was built. But there is also where power line communication comes in. You can use power line communication for internet access with existing infrastructure for a charging station in those garages, for example.
And I think, as you said, Oleg, in the future we will see definitely a lot of new technologies and maybe even new standards. And I like to compare it to the history we jointly have when it's about DC charging. Some years ago we thought 50 kilowatt is already, we are flying to the moon, something like this. And nowadays we are talking about 2 megawatt charging power. And definitely this won't be the last discussion about DC fast charging. In the future we will talk about even higher charging powers. And therefore, definitely, as you said, not only the charging infrastructure, but also as well the electric vehicles need to be able to update in between to take care of the latest developments, which is, of course, a huge challenge, as we see it in other industries, like mobile phone industries. Sooner or later, we all know iPhones and Google phones are dying because of the newest update of the operating system. They cannot really take care of this anymore. But definitely we see a higher grade of digitalization, and that also means we need to develop solutions, hardware-driven solutions, in a different way than we did it in the past.
I would like to ask one question, Christian, for you. Earlier this year, BP hosted Powering the Charge event in London in May, right, which was fantastic, and there was a lot of good conversations about what is the value of business models and how business models will evolve. And I really love the videos that BP showed to the audience. It was titled Charging the Horse, where basically there was a comparison made that the transition from riding on horses and buggies to driving vehicles, ICE vehicles, was as monumental as a transition from ICE vehicles to electric vehicles, because it changes our behaviors, it changes how the world actually uses the technology. So in this evolution, obviously BP is an energy company, so you plan to evolve from fossil fuel world into electric world. Do you also expect a lot of behavioral changes from consumers that will enable new revenue streams and business models?
So, let's say so thank you for mentioning Powering the Charge in London first, and the nice video with the horse, which I love as well. It's really good. So yeah, there will be changes in behaviors. I mean, if someone come into a gas stations today and wants to fill the tank, basically you drive in, you stop, you unplug the nozzles, you put the nozzle into the car, you fill your tank, then put it back, then go in a shop or do some online payment. Basically, you're just doing this, right? Now with the charging events, it's a bit different because you come, you drive in, you park, you plug in, and if Plug&Charge is enabled, that's all you have to do. Right now, you have to use your app or your RFID tag or whatever, right? But imagine Plug&Charge is there. Then you have plenty of time compared to what you have before, in fact. So one big part of our business is to be in a retail business, which is selling services, convenient foods, and other services in the gas stations to the customer. So at that time, now the customer will have more time to enjoy the convenience services in the shop, or differently, maybe entertainment. If you look at Tesla again, you see that you can do some gaming while charging. So there might be that possibility. So there will be changes in the behavior because it's a different use of that time. There might be also a little bit longer. It can't be 30 minutes. It needs to be smaller than 15, 20 minutes, obviously. But there will be some time in it. And then we also need to take into consideration not everyone will stop in a gas station. So we'll have to provide services to the fleet owners, to the fleet depots, to the fleet users, to the home owners. So there will be some changes in that behavior as well. And we are going to take care of that.
Excellent.
So questions coming in, a few on the technology in terms of being able to service and supply the megawatt. We talked about that, and Rustam, if you want to comment on that, and then I have another question on other technologies. But if you want to, there's a question that came in on how ISO 15118 will interact with megawatt plus charging? Is the standard current mature enough to support these developments?
As we know it, yes. We foresee no issue with 15118 being able to support megawatt charging. On the larger issue of how the power gets to the vehicle, we have had utilities on our task force from day one because we understood this was potentially a significant hurdle. Their feedback has been it's simply another demand that they will plan to fulfill, and they foresee some difficulty in order to ramp up in a quick fashion, but as far as a load is concerned, it will just be another load for them.
Great, thanks. Another question came in of what other technologies do you think are driving the e-mobility market and can benefit from the developments of the CCS front? Maybe Eric, maybe you want to take that on as a new mobility company. You had to go through a decision-making process of looking at 15118 as one of the standards for the communication. So maybe you want to comment on that.
Yes, absolutely. So we are particularly happy about the evolution and the drive to bring in new features with ISO 15118, starting with Plug&Charge at our SOP for the convenience with the security that has been mentioned many times, but now also future developments that were just in the previous conversation regarding V2G. So we as basically a hardware manufacturer making cars and also having an eye in Silicon Valley on software and upgradability, we've enabled our vehicle and the charger on board to be a bidirectional charger. We've got 20 kilowatt bidirectional AC, and we can of course do bidirectional DC. We are seeing that one of the big advantages then having that in the car for the future, once the infrastructure landscape can tap out on that. In terms of V2G, we also see the home networks as a very good application for our customers, where they can utilize the vehicle, our long-range battery pack, as a power source for the home. These days here in California, we are having power outages due to fire in the forests, and PG&E is shutting off the power on large populations. So with a Lucid vehicle now in the future, you could power your home over a couple of days out of more than 100 kilowatt hours battery pack. And we see that as another customer advantage enabled by 15118 in the end, and then bring that out to the larger infrastructure, hopefully in the future.
And I think that creates a very interesting dynamic, right, Eric? When we talk about car becoming a backup power for the home, all of a sudden, now the cost of the car can be viewed in a very different light, because if you decide to install a battery backup system in US market or natural gas power generator, it's probably projects that will cost you anywhere between $10,000 to $20,000 depending on the size and what you're using. So now, all of a sudden, if you have a car capable of bidirectional power transfer, you don't need to use this additional $10,000 to $20,000. You can invest into the car. In my opinion, it's a huge change in dynamics.
Correct. You could actually, especially in California, where there's so much problem, not only today with the fires, but also with the network and everything, you could easily imagine having an electric car plus PV system on almost every roof, you know? And then I don't say that you solve the problem, but you certainly help to alleviate it in a big way, huh? And it makes a lot of sense. Again, producing electricity through solar PV is not expensive. Having it in the country with so much sun like California plus an electric car makes a lot of sense, fundamentally.
And maybe not only for the high industrialized markets like California and Europe, but also taking into account what happens right now in the emerging markets. You have seen maybe the press releases of the last time that countries like Indonesia and Philippines decided to set up their own EV industry, producing their own electric vehicles. And of course, it totally makes sense to also think about how these countries can support electrification where maybe no stable electricity grid is in place, or maybe no grid at all. But of course, you can imagine that electric vehicles can be a rolling grid, so to say. So you can bring home your electricity from a city where you're working over the day to home where maybe no stable electricity grid connection is, but still you can use the electricity in your car, in your electric vehicle, for watching TV or whatever you're doing, or putting on your laundry. And I think that's something completely new. We need to think about how we can also electrify the mobility chain in emerging markets where no electricity grid is in place or no stable electricity grid.
So basically, that type of fundamental shift in behavior, in technologies that enables essentially different composition of the product probably is driving also the concept that maybe we need to look at total cost of ownership when it comes to electric vehicle and look at it in a very different way than we look at gasoline vehicle, because as an example, component of providing backup power for the home does not exist today. Or as an example, using school buses as a grid stabilization resource while they're parked in the parking lot between the morning time and the daytime never was possible for, as an example, diesel-powered buses. So I think that type of models will probably create a monumental shift. Any thoughts on that?
And this is also a question, a lot of questions on vehicle to grid, if that's possible, and how ISO 15118, the standard, how is that addressing an expanded use cases such as vehicle to grid? A lot of questions on that.
Again, I think...
If I can jump in here.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Please, Rustam.
From the truck standpoint, we see the potential for not only demand response, like I pointed out before, where charging the vehicle is responsive to the needs of the utility if they need to throttle down for a period of time, but also the vehicle to grid capability, like you said, with school buses, whether they can do grid stabilization during the day or during the summer, as well as trucks. If you're carrying 500 kilowatt hours on board, become a very interesting prospect for emergency services. Like during the forest fires right now, you could use potentially a Class 8 truck to power an emergency services center or things along those lines, or keep things frozen, keep medicines cold, things along those lines. There's a lot of capability to carrying that much power around and having it be mobile.
Maybe just one comment to 15118 and bidirectional charging. It's again only the enabler. What we are doing from it, it's a different story. There are a lot of interesting challenges we just talked about. My personal opinion on it is that it must be easy to use in the end for the customer, at least for private customers. Otherwise, there is no challenge, because if it is not easy to use, nobody may want to use it. And it is already rising, the complexity with load balancing, because usually if you plug in, you assume you have constant power, and my brain can calculate when it's ready. So 15118 already supports that, because we can, with load balancing, it's non-linear, but we can send some schedules, so you can predict it already at the point in time when you plug in. So it helps the user to see when the car is really finished with charging, although it is not linear. That's the first step. And for bidirectional charging, you have again another challenge. If you want to use the car with a certain SOC, state of charge, or with a certain distance that you need, it should be available, because you assume a car to be available when you need the mobility. And I think that's one challenge in bidirectional charging, because you are discharging the car, and at that moment in time when the user needs the car, you have to ensure that he can have his mobility that he needs, whatever that means. You have just to meet the expectations.
So it sounds to me like what we're dealing here with is really more reminiscent of Internet of Things rather than anything else. We have multiple industries, multiple verticals that now have to collaborate: energy, transportation, manufacturing, right? And all of a sudden, what you just said is probably a big data problem, right? When we have a lot of information that can be transformed through the AI into wisdom that actually generates values outside of conventional business models.
Maybe it's not only an issue of the technology we are using, but it's definitely an issue how we can explain it to the normal EV driver. We all know using electric vehicles is already a bit more complicated. We need to educate on the range anxiety topic and how can I charge a car. This is this is a big challenge for people who are not used to this. But we are seeing right now is I know the example of Rotterdam, but I assume there are many more examples in place where Rotterdam decided to connect all public charging stations to a smart charging package system. That means, based on the load in the electricity grid, the charging stations are putting more or less power into the electric vehicles. And of course, when you're connecting your car in the evening, when you're coming home, you expect that on the next day, your electric vehicle is fully recharged. That's how you used it. But it's not happening because the charging power is managed, because maybe there's a gap in the electricity grid. And EV drivers are getting frustrated because they have a completely different expectation as they are getting in the next day, and that needs to be educated. Right now, they put a small sign on the charging stations stating that the charging stations are not delivering the full amount of power, but definitely we need to take this into account, how we can include the normal EV driver into this complex ecosystem and explain it to him properly.
Yes, and that will take a little bit of time as well, but I think here our friend from the utilities, both the new ones and the traditional ones, are extremely important, because eventually this will work also for the benefit. The utilities, they have to balance all these things. They have also to make sure that the network is not only stable, but also can deliver over promises and actually getting to this famous decarbonization, right? And for us, for Hager, it was obvious since the first day that, we see clearly, as we showed this morning in small drawings, the house, it was very passive, very, isolated in a way, not connected whatsoever. And gradually, maybe it will take 20 or 30 years possible, but it will be active, it will be highly connected, and it will be, a completely different type of product doing the same thing, honestly. We have, but in a much different way, and this is a complete change, completely change. And of course, we have to educate the market, we educate our installers, we have to educate our people, we have to develop new products. But it's a great opportunity for maybe 30 years to come. So it's clearly the future. We hope we are going to be up to the challenge, but it's a very exciting challenge.
I think we can make a parallel with the telecom market. Back in 30 years ago or 40 years ago, even more. At my home, we have only one phone with a small dialer. It was green, right? There was only one contract, one suppliers, and there was no service, basically, right? So now you go into a shop, you buy a package, which is basically linked to an SLA, which is a service level agreement. So you will pay $99.90 or pounds or euro per month. And then for that, you get a package on your broadband, on your Wi-Fi, on your services, and what's go on top of it in terms of content and entertainment. So I would bet like in 10 years from now, we will have marketing companies, operators going in the market, providing an SLA package to the end customer. So it makes the life of the customer easier, right? So you can then control, you can monitor, you can serve that customer that way. And that's why that ISO 15008 is interesting, because it's going to be just in the middle of what the car OEMs will need to do, what the operators to the customer will need to do, what the middleman will need to do to make it happen, what the manufacturers of chargers, and behind the scenes, all the equipment you need to connect to the homes as well, to the CNI, to do the load management. But I bet that at the end of the day, we need to have a very simple language to the customer. Here's a package, $19.99 per month. You want to go more on that? All right, you can upgrade to more power. This is 50 grand a month now, right? Something like this.
And one thing we haven't talked about with regards to ISO 15118 are the value-added services. ISO 15118 has all the use cases we just described, charging, discharging, and wireless, and so on. But there might be use cases that we haven't thought of yet, with regards to communication between the car and a system that is in the cloud, or for example, if you have a fleet of buses and you want to communicate your central system that coordinates information to the different buses in a depot, you can use that, for example, using validated services. There is a broad spectrum of different services possible. It is up to the customer, not the end user, but the one who operates a fleet, for example, to think of those services and then implement them on their own.
And those are all tools available in the standard. Those are documented. So it's for the companies to look at the standard of how they want to apply that to their own business use.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think Christian made a great point, right? It is an evolution. In telecom, we have seen the evolution, and what became possible and reduction of the cost of actually having telecom package came from this economy of scale and growing interoperability. But it took a period of time to arrive there. So we just need to follow and try to accelerate it. I think that's the best remedy we have.
So we are almost coming to our conclusion. We've got 10 minutes left. There were a lot of questions here that we didn't get to, but some of them were talking about what is actually happening, who is doing implementing 15.11.8, and how close are we? And I think it's very important to state that the test, the demo that we had today is here in a controlled environment, but there are implementations that are happening, and a lot of companies have taken that step. And probably one of the biggest press releases that confirmed this was in the United States, where Ford announced their partnership with Greenlots and Electrify America, enabling their future vehicles to be plug-and-charge enabled and to utilize the implementation and the infrastructure of Electrify America and Greenlots in the United States. And so I think that's a really big step forward, in addition to a lot of the auto OEMs here in Europe and the implementations that are going on here through Ionity and Ultra E, and obviously we've seen here the demo and the testing of the Porsche Taycan, the Audi e-tron, and additional cars that are coming up. And also from my experience and some private conversations, other companies that are looking at this, but they're just not able to mention it right now. So I think that we've come across a huge, big gap in what was happening, which was the cars. And obviously the infrastructure is going to complement that now that there's a reason to have plug-and-charge in the infrastructure.
Exactly, and I think what we're starting to see with the announcement from Ford, you mentioned before, is basically this transition towards, it's all about the user of the technology, about the customer. It has to be easy, simple, and available everywhere. So I think it's important at this point of time, since we're getting very close to the end of our webinar, we only have about 7 minutes left or so. I would like to ask all of the panelists, if you would be given, let's say, 10, 20 seconds just to make a closing statement, what would be the most important things that you would like to share with our audience? Anybody would like to start?
Don't be afraid of ISO 15118.
Say it again.
Don't be afraid of ISO 15118. Coming back to the complexity issue, it is a huge standard because it covers so many use cases. And you don't have to implement everything. Choose a use case you want to implement and then do it. And there are a lot of providers, service providers in the market that already have components ready for you to implement them. And there are also experts in the field that are happy to educate you and help you with consultancy.
Well, I would jump on the same, actually. Thank you, Mark. We said, don't be afraid about the future. It is coming, and actually it's rather positive. But when you listen to TVs or you read newspapers, it's always, it's a problem, there's a problem here, there's a problem. I think this is bullshit. The thing is that, it is actually better to have electricity produced from renewables. It's better for our planet, it's better for our children, actually cheaper. So don't be afraid of the future. You have a lot of people around this table and everywhere in the world willing and able to tackle this problem, to solve the problem. I think it's actually a greater future, a better future than people usually see today.
Yeah, okay, my comment is very short. I think it's very important to always think about ease of use for the customer. I think this is most important because in the end, the people are used to some comfort already using a personal car, and I think this must be, again, the same for the electric car. And charging is different to pumping gas, but in the end, it must be considered as no problem for the customer, whatever that means. And the second thing is interoperability. In the end, we can only get to a comfortable charging system if it is interoperable. for everybody at every station at every time. I think this is very important.
The topic I like to add is, and maybe it's surprising you, but we are all big fans of ISO, I would say. So therefore, definitely we will continue our implementation all together, all the people and companies on stage. But I would also like to invite the companies who are not present on stage here nowadays to join us in this joint effort, because only if we are discussing the topics which are maybe still marked with a question mark, or which are maybe not yet described as well as we needed, please join us in our activities. We mentioned a lot of opportunities, how you can support us, testing symposiums, we have sanitization working groups, but we also, every one of us is free to reach out to, so that we can take your comments and maybe also your fears you have, your thoughts you have into account and create something better, but jointly. I think that's definitely needed in this very complex industry, and we can only achieve something better if we are working all together.
So the first edition of the standard was back in 2014, if I understand correctly. So we are seeing car comings now enabled with that technology, which is basically the time you need to design a new car, more or less, right? So it's not that stupid to have cars right now. So it's time to have a proof of concept to do that. I mean, on the ground. So I suggest it could be very useful now to enable some use cases in real life with players from car OEMs and operators and so on. So it's time to do it and see what's good cases we can do out of it, and what's a business behind for all the stakeholders. Because if we want to build an ecosystem, that means all the stakeholders needs to find a benefit into it. Otherwise, it will collapse.
Eric?
Yeah, for me, there are two messages, actually. One is, of course, to all the technologists behind the standard. And it's basically a thank you, and let's make this standard one of the global platforms and keep it evolving and adding more and more technology features for our customers in the future that we can then over the air upload or download to our products, whether it's vehicles, cars, motorcycles, or trucks and buses, aeroplanes, etc. And then the second addressee would be the customers of our vehicles. Embrace this revolution or this new phase of electromobility, and we are giving you charging with a global standard that will evolve and will keep you up to date for the future and everything that's coming out there.
Rustam, close it up for us.
Thanks. So when we look at commercial vehicles using electrification and we look at our customer base, we would say there's 5 maybe main things that they look to for a charging standard like this. It has to be safe, it has to be secure, it has to be stable, it has to be simple, and it has to be fast or speedy. So we'll go 5 S's, and I think 15.11.8 gets us there on all of those.
Excellent. I think this is a perfect closing statement. So with that, I would like to thank all of our panelists. Yes. And I think you've done an amazing job, and there is a wealth of information that we all learned today. I would like to suggest that maybe it makes sense to continue this dialogue and plan for a future event, but maybe it also makes sense to look at some of the questions that came in. We obviously didn't have a chance to answer all of them. And maybe even consider additional questions from our participants. So we can continue this discussion and maybe transform it into a white paper or two and continue the dialogue, because the more education we can do, the better we serve the market. What do you think?
Can start a big blog.
Why not?
Oleg, you should start it.
Well,
again, thank you to all of the webinar participants. I think we reached over, I think, 700 or 800 during the peak of the webinar. So it is an amazing message of how much people are interested in the standard and how it can affect them and benefit them on a business-wise and maybe personally. Again, a lot of questions here. So to our panelists, thank you very much for your time and sharing your experiences and thoughts on this topic.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that ends this webinar. Once again, thank you, sponsors, for supporting this event. Thank you for your contribution. It would not have been possible without you. Thank you, Hager, for hosting us here. Beautiful facility, Hager Forum. Beautiful demonstrations this morning. Hubject, IoTecha, Hager, Porsche. Great job together. It's about collaboration. It's about ecosystem. Stay tuned. The best is yet to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you.